By the end of this video, you'll understand why highly sensitive people often need more time to process experiences, conversations, and decisions, and why this is a completely normal part of the trait. In this video, you'll discover why highly sensitive people often realize what they really felt or wanted to say hours after a conversation has ended. What is actually happening in the highly sensitive brain that makes deeper processing take more time, and why needing more time to process experiences, decisions, and emotions is a completely normal part of the trait. Imagine you're in a conversation with someone. Maybe it's a colleague giving you feedback, or maybe it's a friend sharing something emotional, or maybe it's a decision that needs to be made. In the moment, you're responding the best you can. You're listening, maybe you say something thoughtful, and eventually the conversation ends and everything went fine. But later that evening, something starts happening in your mind. You are noticing that you're replaying the conversation, and you're noticing things you didn't notice before. Maybe it was just the tone of voice of a particular sentence, or some small hesitation that you're just noticing at this point, or a feeling in your body that you didn't quite register at the time. And suddenly you realize something. Oh, that's what was going on. It hits you. And this is hours later, but you really actually get the more in-depth understanding of what was actually happening in that situation. Or you may realize, oh, that's what I really wanted to say. And it becomes clear, oh my gosh, why didn't I say that at the time, Or you may become aware that something about that just didn't sit quite right, something about that situation, and you become aware of what that was. So for many highly sensitive people, this can be frustrating. You may think, why didn't I see that in the moment? Or why do I always realize things later? And why do I need so much time to figure out what I think? But this pattern is not a flaw in any way. It's a feature of how the highly sensitive nervous system actually works. Highly sensitive people process experiences more deeply. And that means that your brain doesn't just register what is said on the surface, it continues integrating the emotional tone, the meaning, the context, and the implications. You'll be looking at all of these one by one automatically as you think through and process any particular experience. That's just the way we're wired. And sometimes that integration takes time. That clarity arrives, and it arrives profoundly at times, but usually it arrives later. It's not just right there in the moment. So to understand why that happens, it helps to look at how different brains handle the same information. Researchers who study the highly sensitive trait often talk about something called depth of processing, and it's one of the core elements of the HSP trait. It forms part of the DOES framework, coined by Dr. Elaine Aron, and D stands for depth of processing. So O stands for overwhelm, E stands for emotion or empathy, and S stands for sensitivity. So D for depth of processing is a major component of this process, of this trait of being an HSP. And depth of processing means that the brain takes in information and works with it more thoroughly before coming to conclusions. Instead of reacting quickly and moving on, the mind is asking questions like, what does this really mean? How does this connect to other things? What emotional signals are present in this situation? And what might be the long-term impact of this? These kinds of questions take time to sort through and to come to conclusions about. And that's what the HSP brain is wired to do. And it also takes more time to process all of these deeper questions. A helpful way to think about this is to imagine two computer programs given the exact same data. The first program performs a simple calculation. It looks at the information, runs a quick operation, and produces an answer almost immediately. The second program runs a much more complex analysis. It cross-references the data, it evaluates patterns, it integrates additional variables, and it checks for implications. And because it's doing more work, the result takes longer to appear. But the output is also richer, and that's the value of it. The highly sensitive brain works more like this second kind of computer program. When something happens in a conversation, your system doesn't just register the surface content, it begins processing all the elements there, and it starts looking at the implications, it considers the relational dynamics, it considers everything. And all of that information is being integrated, and that integration takes time. And that's why clarity often appears later. As an HSP, your system is not slow, it's running a deeper analysis. So if you'd given the same person who ran the quick analysis, because their brain works that way, if you had put the same kind of program that we have into their brain, they would have taken just as long as we did. So we're not doing anything slower, we're just doing a lot more. And it's really good to keep that in mind. And when they look at the brain imaging studies, it supports this. Researchers have found that highly sensitive people show stronger activation in areas of the brain associated with deeper information processing and emotional awareness. So when clarity comes hours later, your brain has just been running an in-depth computation. Not everyone is gifted with this ability to sort through everything in such a thorough way. As HSPs, this happens automatically for us. Once you understand this, something important shifts. You stop judging the timing of your clarity. Instead of thinking, I should have known that immediately, you start recognizing, oh, my system processes things more deeply. And it doesn't mean that I'm being indecisive. It doesn't mean that I'm overthinking. It means that my mind is taking the time it needs to integrate what happened. And that depth often leads to insights that others may miss. So you might notice that with this trait, you're picking up on emotional nuances in a conversation, and you might understand relational dynamics more clearly, and you might connect patterns that weren't obvious at first. But those insights often arrive after the moment has passed, and that's okay. It's similar to how, like if you think of the body, it takes time to digest food. You don't just eat a meal and instantly absorb all the nutrients. In fact, there's some nutrients you absorb right away, like sugar or something, and other nutrients that take a long time to process, like the slow carbohydrates that take a long time to reach the bloodstream. Both are important. And so as HSPs, we have a role in this way. In this video, we looked at why highly sensitive people often realize what they really felt or wanted to say hours after a conversation has ended. And that is simply because it takes time to connect all the dots. And we looked at what is actually happening in the highly sensitive brain that makes deeper processing take more time. And that is simply we are accessing those areas that are concerned with depth and with emotion. And finally, we looked at why needing more time to process experiences, decisions, and emotions is a completely normal part of the trait. And that is, somebody has to be the one to connect these dots and to see these things and to come to these kinds of conclusions. And evolutionarily, this is supported not only in in our species as human beings, but in over 100 different species that have been measured. Always about 15 to 20% of the population has this high sensitivity. They do things more slowly, but they catch nuances that others miss. And this is a great gift to any society, and we provide that as highly sensitive individuals. So the feeling I'm left with today is that slow processing is undervalued in a world that rewards fast action. But this very slowness is what allows for thorough and deep work, which is more important than speed in many applications. There's room for speed, there's a need for speed and quickness in many applications, but there's a room for slowness and thoroughness and depth in many applications. And we provide the depth that those who specialize in speed are unable to do.